Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she adjusted another paper target on the wooden frame. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the military training range, and she had been working since dawn preparing for the afternoon shooting exercises. As a civilian contractor, her job was simple enough: set up targets, maintain the range equipment, and ensure everything ran smoothly for the soldiers who came to practice their marksmanship. She had taken this job 6 months ago after losing her position at a local manufacturing plant. The pay was decent and she needed the work to support her 8-year-old daughter, Emma. Sarah had no military background herself, but she was reliable and hardworking, qualities that the base commander appreciated. The soldiers treated her with respect, though most barely noticed her presence as she went about her duties. This particular afternoon felt different somehow. There was an unusual tension in the air, and she noticed several high-ranking officers moving about with clipboards and serious expressions. Sarah had learned not to ask too many questions about military operations, but her curiosity was piqued when she saw a group of men in different uniforms arriving in unmarked vehicles. As she secured the last target at the 300-yard mark, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of boots approaching on the gravel behind her. She turned to see a tall, lean man with piercing blue eyes watching her work. Unlike the regular soldiers she was accustomed to, this man moved with a fluid grace that spoke of extensive training. His uniform bore no visible rank insignia, but there was an unmistakable authority in his presence. The stranger observed silently as Sarah finished her task, checking each target for proper positioning. She felt self-conscious under his intense gaze but continued her work professionally. When she finally turned to acknowledge him, he stepped forward with a slight nod. "Ma'am," he said in a quiet voice that somehow carried clearly, despite the desert wind. "I'm Commander Jake Thompson. I understand you've been maintaining this range for several months now." Sarah nodded, unsure why a commander would be interested in her routine maintenance work. "Yes, sir, about 6 months. Is there something wrong with the setup?" Jake's expression remained neutral, but she caught a hint of something, perhaps approval, in his eyes. "On the contrary, I've been watching you work for the past hour. Your attention to detail is impressive. Every target is positioned precisely, every measurement exact. Most people rush through tasks like this." She felt a flush of pride at the unexpected compliment. In her previous job, her meticulous nature had often been seen as unnecessarily slow. Here it seemed to matter. "I believe in doing things right," Sarah replied simply. "These soldiers depend on proper equipment for their training. If I don't do my job correctly, it could affect their preparation." Jake studied her for a long moment as if weighing something important in his mind. Around them, other soldiers were beginning to arrive for the afternoon training session. Sarah could see them setting up their own equipment, but none approached the area where she and Jake stood. "Tell me, Sarah," Jake said, and she was surprised he knew her name. "Have you ever fired a weapon before?" The question caught her off guard. "No, sir, never. I mean, I've seen the soldiers practice, but I've never actually handled a firearm myself. It's not really part of my job description." Jake nodded slowly, his gaze shifting to the targets she had so carefully arranged. "Sometimes the most important skills aren't found in job descriptions," he said cryptically. "Sometimes they're discovered in unexpected moments." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond to that, so she remained silent. She gathered her tools, preparing to return to the equipment shed as the soldiers began their training exercises. But as she turned to leave, Jake's voice stopped her. "Sarah, would you mind staying for a few minutes? I'd like you to observe something." It wasn't really a request, despite his polite phrasing. Sarah set down her toolbox and watched as Jake signaled to the other men. They moved with the same fluid precision she had noticed in Jake, spreading out along the firing line with practiced efficiency. What happened next would change everything. Sarah thought she knew about herself, about capability, and about the unexpected ways life could shift in a single moment. As she stood in the desert heat, watching these elite soldiers prepare for their exercise, she had no idea that she was about to discover a talent that would alter the course of her entire future. The soldiers took their positions along the firing line, each one checking their weapons with movements so automatic they seemed almost ritualistic. Sarah watched from a safe distance, fascinated despite herself by the precision and discipline on display. She had seen regular army training before, but this group was different. Every gesture was economical, purposeful, without a single wasted motion. Jake moved among his men, speaking in low tones that Sarah couldn't quite hear over the desert wind. Occasionally, one of the soldiers would nod or make a subtle adjustment to his stance. It was like watching a choreographed performance where everyone knew their role perfectly. First exercise is standard marksmanship at 200 yards, Jake announced, his voice carrying clearly across the range. Thompson, you're up first. A stocky soldier with graying temples stepped forward, raising his rifle with fluid efficiency. The crack of the gunshot echoed across the desert, followed by several more in rapid succession. Even from her position, Sarah could see the tight grouping of holes that appeared in the target. One by one, each soldier took his turn. Their accuracy was extraordinary, far beyond what Sarah had observed during regular army training sessions. These weren't just good soldiers. They were elite marksmen, each shot placed with surgical precision. As the exercise continued, Sarah found herself studying not just the shooting, but the entire process. She noticed how each man adjusted his stance slightly based on wind conditions, how they controlled their breathing, the way they aligned their bodies with their targets. It was like watching masters at work. And despite having no experience with firearms, she began to understand the mechanics of what made them so effective. Interesting perspective you have there, Jake said, appearing beside her so quietly that she jumped slightly. What do you see when you watch them? Sarah hesitated, unsure if her observations would sound foolish to someone with his obvious expertise. They're not just aiming at the targets, she said slowly. They're reading everything, the wind, the distance, even the way the heat affects the air. It's like they're solving a complex equation with every shot. Jake's eyebrows raised slightly. Go on. William's there. Sarah pointed to a tall soldier currently at the line. He adjusts his grip slightly before each shot based on how his previous round performed. And Martinez compensates for that crosswind by aiming about 2 inches left of center. They're constantly adapting. For the first time since she'd met him, Jake smiled. It transformed his entire face, making him seem less intimidating and more approachable. You've been watching very carefully. Most people just see the shooting. You're seeing the thinking. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. I suppose I've always noticed details. It's just how my mind works. Detail-oriented thinking is crucial in precision shooting, Jake said. But observation is only the first step. The real test is application. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Jake called out to his men. Gentlemen, we're going to try something different. Take a break. The soldiers lowered their weapons and stepped back from the line, but Sarah noticed they remained alert, watching their commander with interest. Whatever Jake had planned, it wasn't part of their usual routine. Jake walked to the equipment rack and selected a rifle, checking it with the same methodical care she had observed in his men. He then did something that made Sarah's heart rate spike. He walked directly toward her, carrying the weapon. Sir, I don't think I should, Sarah began, instinctively taking a step backward. Relax, Jake said calmly. The weapon isn't loaded, and we're going to start with basics. I want to test a theory. What kind of theory? Sarah asked, though part of her was already intrigued despite her nervousness. You've demonstrated exceptional observational skills and attention to detail. You understand the mechanics of what you've been watching, even without hands-on experience. I want to see if that translates to practical application. Sarah glanced around at the elite soldiers watching this interaction with obvious curiosity. She felt completely out of her depth, like an amateur being asked to perform surgery because she had watched medical shows on television. Commander Thompson, I appreciate your confidence, but I'm just a civilian contractor. I set up targets and maintain equipment. I don't have any business handling weapons. Jake studied her face carefully, and Sarah had the unsettling feeling that he was reading her thoughts. Sarah, in my experience, some of the most capable individuals are those who don't yet know their own capabilities. You've been observing these exercises for months, absorbing information without even realizing it. Your mind is already trained to see what matters. He extended the rifle toward her, holding it safely by the barrel. One test. If I'm wrong, you go back to your regular duties and we never speak of this again. But if I'm right, he paused, meeting her eyes. If I'm right, you might discover something about yourself that could change everything. Sarah stared at the weapon, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to refuse, to return to the safety of her familiar routine. But another part, a part she rarely acknowledged, was curious about what she might be capable of. She thought about Emma, about the life she was trying to build, about the feeling that she was meant for something more than just getting by. Slowly, Almost without conscious decision, Sarah reached out and accepted the rifle. The rifle felt surprisingly heavy in Sarah's hands, heavier than she had expected from watching the soldiers handle them with such ease. Jake positioned himself beside her, his voice taking on an instructional tone that was both patient and authoritative. "First lesson is always safety," he said, pointing out the various components of the weapon. "Treat every firearm as if it's loaded even when you know it isn't. Never point it at anything you don't intend to destroy. Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot." Sarah listened intently, absorbing each instruction. The weight of the rifle was becoming more familiar in her grip, and she found herself naturally adjusting her hold based on what she had observed during months of watching the soldiers train. "Good," Jake noted. "You're already making instinctive corrections. Now let's talk about stance." He guided her through the basic shooting position, explaining how to distribute her weight, how to align her body with the target, and how to create a stable platform for accurate shooting. Sarah was surprised by how natural it felt, as if her body had been unconsciously learning these movements just from observation. "Your stance is remarkably good for a first-timer," Jake commented. "Most people fight the weapon, trying to muscle it into position. You're working with it instead." The other soldiers had gathered closer now, watching with obvious interest. Sarah felt their attention like a weight on her shoulders, but somehow, it wasn't as intimidating as she had expected. These men were professionals, and their focus seemed more curious than judgmental. "Now we're going to load the weapon," Jake announced, producing a magazine from his gear. "Remember everything I just told you about safety?" Sarah's heart rate increased as Jake inserted the magazine and showed her how to chamber a round. The rifle suddenly felt alive in her hands, transformed from an interesting piece of machinery into something powerful and potentially dangerous. "The target is 100 yards out," Jake said, pointing to one of the paper targets she had positioned earlier that morning. "This is a relatively easy shot for these conditions. I want you to take your time, remember what you've observed, and trust your instincts." Sarah raised the rifle to her shoulder, peering through the scope Jake had attached. The target appeared much closer than she had expected, the black circle crisp and clear against the white paper. She could feel Jake's presence beside her, steady and reassuring. "Control your breathing," he said quietly. "In, out. Halfway in, hold, and squeeze the trigger slowly." Sarah followed his instructions, trying to replicate the controlled movements she had watched the soldiers perform hundreds of times. The crosshairs wavered slightly as she found her natural point of aim, then settled into stillness. The rifle fired with a sharp crack that was louder than she had anticipated. The recoil pushed against her shoulder, but her stance absorbed it naturally. She kept her eye on the scope, watching as a small hole appeared in the target. "Well, I'll be damned," muttered one of the soldiers behind her. Sarah lowered the rifle, blinking in surprise. Through the scope, she could see that her shot had struck the target near the center ring, far closer than she had any right to expect on her first attempt. Jake was staring at the target through his own spotting scope, a look of genuine surprise crossing his features. "That's a 7-ring hit at 100 yards. On your first shot ever. Is that good?" Sarah asked, though the expressions on the faces around her suggested it was more than good. "Ma'am," said the soldier who had muttered earlier. "Most recruits miss the entire target on their first few attempts. You just outshot some people I know who've been training for years." Jake lowered his spotting scope and looked at Sarah with new interest. "I want you to try again. Same target, same distance. Let's see if that was beginner's luck or something more." Sarah raised the rifle again, settling into the shooting position that was already beginning to feel familiar. This time she felt more confident. Understanding the weapon's recoil and the way the scope presented the target, she went through the breathing routine Jake had taught her, letting her body find its natural stillness. The second shot felt different somehow, more controlled and deliberate. When she lowered the rifle and looked toward the target, she could see another hole had appeared, this one even closer to the center. 8-ring, Jake announced, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been excitement. 2 shots, 2 solid hits, consistent grouping. Sarah stared at the target, hardly believing what she was seeing. Something was happening here that didn't make sense according to everything she thought she knew about herself. She was a single mother who worked maintenance jobs and struggled to pay bills. She wasn't supposed to be good at things like this. "I want to try the 200-yard target," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the request. Jake exchanged glances with his men. and Sarah caught the subtle nods that passed between them. Whatever was happening here, they were all beginning to recognize it as something unusual. The 200-yard target requires more precision, Jake warned. The bullet drop is more significant and environmental factors become more important. I understand, Sarah said, and realized that she actually did understand. All those months of watching, of unconsciously absorbing the techniques and adjustments she had observed, were coming together in her mind like pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known she was solving. Jake made the necessary adjustments to the scope and pointed out the more distant target. As Sarah raised the rifle for her third shot ever, she had no idea that this moment would mark the beginning of a journey that would take her far beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. Sarah studied the distant target through the scope, immediately noticing how much smaller it appeared compared to the 100-yard target. She could feel the slight desert breeze against her cheek and found herself automatically compensating for it, adjusting her aim slightly to the left, just as she had observed the soldiers doing countless times. Take your time, Jake advised. But Sarah was already settling into what felt like a natural rhythm. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate steadied, and the world seemed to narrow down to just her, the rifle, and the target in the distance. The third shot broke cleanly, and Sarah maintained her position behind the scope to watch the impact. A small hole appeared in the target, and even at 200 yards, she could tell it was well within the scoring rings. Jesus Christ, breathed one of the soldiers. Jake was already behind his spotting scope, confirming what they could all see. 9 ring. Dead center vertical, maybe an inch left of perfect. He lowered the scope and looked at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. Ma'am, I've been training marksmen for 15 years. What you just did doesn't happen. Sarah felt a strange mixture of pride and confusion. Maybe I just got lucky 3 times? Luck doesn't explain consistent accuracy, said the soldier Jake had called Williams earlier. Luck is random. What you're doing is skill, even if you don't understand it yet. Jake walked over to the equipment rack and returned with a different rifle, this one equipped with a more powerful scope. This is chambered for longer range work. I want to see what happens at 300 yards. Sarah accepted the new weapon, noting its different balance and weight. It felt more substantial than the first rifle, purpose-built for precision rather than general use. As Jake explained the differences in ballistics and scope adjustment, Sarah found herself understanding concepts that should have been completely foreign to her. The bullet will drop approximately 8 inches at this distance, Jake explained. You'll need to compensate by aiming higher, or I can adjust the scope to account for the drop. Show me how to read the scope adjustments, Sarah said. I want to understand how it works. Jake's eyebrows rose slightly, but he patiently explained the mechanics of scope adjustment, bullet trajectory, and environmental compensation. Sarah absorbed every detail, asking questions that demonstrated an intuitive grasp of the physics involved. You're thinking like a sniper, Jake observed. Most people just want to point and shoot. You want to understand the system. As Sarah prepared for the 300-yard shot, she noticed that more personnel had gathered to watch. Word was apparently spreading across the base about the civilian contractor who was shooting. Better than trained soldiers on her first day with a rifle. The 300-yard target was barely visible to the naked eye, just a small white square against the desert backdrop. Through the scope, Sarah could make out the scoring rings, but they required much more precision to hit consistently. She took extra time to study the wind indicators, noting how the flags and vegetation moved in the shifting breeze. Wind's variable, she murmured, more to herself than to Jake. Shifting from left to right, maybe 3 to 5 miles per hour. Jake nodded approvingly. How do you know that? The way the grass is moving differently at various distances, and the flag near the target is behaving differently than the one closer to us. Sarah paused, realizing she had no idea how she knew these things. I guess I've been watching the soldiers read wind signs without realizing it. She settled into her shooting position, making fine adjustments based on everything she had observed and learned in the past hour. The rifle felt like an extension of her body now, and she found herself naturally compensating for factors she couldn't even consciously identify. The shot surprised her with its smoothness. Everything had aligned perfectly. Her position, her breathing, the sight picture, the trigger squeeze. She knew it was a good shot before she even looked for the impact. 10 ring, Jake announced, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. Perfect center. at 300 yards, with a weapon you'd never fired before today. The gathered soldiers erupted in quiet conversation, their voices carrying tones of amazement and respect. Sarah lowered the rifle, staring at the distant target where her shot had found its mark with precision that defied all logic. "Ma'am," said a grizzled sergeant who had been watching from the back of the group, "I've been shooting competitively for 20 years. What you just did, that's master-level marksmanship." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. She had come to work this morning expecting to spend another routine day maintaining equipment and setting up targets. Instead, she had discovered an ability that seemed to defy everything she thought she knew about herself. "I don't understand," she said, looking around at the faces watching her with new respect. "How is this possible? I've never done anything like this before." Jake took the rifle from her hands, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes extraordinary ability lies dormant until the right moment reveals it. You've been unconsciously training for months, absorbing techniques and strategies just by observation. But more than that, you have natural gifts that can't be taught. Exceptional hand-eye coordination, instinctive understanding of ballistics, and the mental discipline to perform under pressure." He paused, studying her face carefully. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I think you have the potential to be one of the finest precision shooters I've ever encountered. The question is, what do you want to do with that potential?" Sarah stared at him, her mind reeling with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. Her simple life of just getting by suddenly seemed very small compared to the glimpses of capability she had just experienced. Sarah drove home that evening in a daze, her mind replaying the events at the range over and over. The familiar landscape of her neighborhood seemed different somehow, as if she was seeing it through new eyes. When she pulled into the driveway of her small rental house, Emma came running out to greet her, backpack bouncing as she hurried down the front steps. "Mom, Mrs. Peterson says I got the highest score on my math test again," Emma announced proudly, wrapping her arms around Sarah's waist. Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." As they walked inside together, Sarah found herself looking at Emma with new awareness. Her daughter had always been exceptional at recognizing patterns, solving complex problems, and maintaining focus for hours on activities that interested her. Were these traits genetic? Had Sarah been carrying similar capabilities all along without recognizing them? "Mom, you look different," Emma observed with the sharp perception that often surprised Sarah. "Did something good happen at work today?" Sarah paused in the kitchen, unsure how to explain what had occurred. "Something unexpected happened. I discovered I might be good at something I never thought I could do." "Like what?" "It's complicated, honey, but it might mean some changes for us. Good changes." That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of coffee and tried to make sense of Jake's offer. He had asked her to consider training with his unit, to develop the natural ability she had demonstrated. The opportunity came with significant benefits: better pay, comprehensive health insurance, educational opportunities, and the chance to be part of something meaningful. But it also meant leaving behind the safe, predictable routine she had built for herself and Emma. It meant taking risks and pushing herself into areas where she had no experience or confidence, beyond what had happened in those few hours at the range. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Sarah, this is Jake Thompson. I wanted to give you some information to consider. If you're interested in learning more about the opportunities we discussed, please call me tomorrow. There's a lot we didn't have time to cover today." Sarah stared at the message for a long time before setting the phone aside. She walked to Emma's room and stood in the doorway, watching her daughter sleep peacefully. Everything Sarah did was ultimately about giving Emma the best possible future. The question was whether this unexpected opportunity would help or hinder that goal. The next morning brought its usual routine: getting Emma ready for school, packing lunches, and the familiar drive to the base. But when Sarah arrived at the range, she found Jake waiting for her with a folder of documents and a serious expression. "I took the liberty of researching some programs that might interest you," he said without preamble. "There are several paths we could explore depending on your goals and comfort level." Sarah accepted the folder, noting the official letterheads and detailed program descriptions inside. "You're really serious about this?" "Dead serious. Sarah, what you demonstrated yesterday doesn't come along often. In my entire career, I've maybe encountered 3 or 4 individuals with your level of natural ability. It would be a waste not to develop it properly. As Jake explained the various training programs and career opportunities, Sarah felt both excited and terrified. Some programs would require temporary relocation. Others could be completed while maintaining her current living situation. All of them offered significantly better financial prospects than her current job. "What about Emma?" Sarah asked. "I can't disrupt her life for my career ambitions." Actually, many of these programs include excellent family support services, educational opportunities for dependents, healthcare, housing allowances. Your daughter would have access to resources that might not otherwise be available. Jake opened to a specific page in the folder. This program in particular caught my attention. It's a civilian contractor precision shooting program that works with various government agencies. The training is intensive but can be completed in phases. Most importantly, it's based here, so Emma wouldn't have to change schools or leave her friends. Sarah studied the program details, noting the salary figures that were nearly triple her current income. But more than the money, she was drawn to the sense of purpose and capability the opportunity represented. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said. "Why are you doing this?" "You barely know me." Jake leaned back against the equipment rack, considering his answer. 20 years ago, I was a young soldier with potential that nobody recognized, including myself. A senior sergeant took a chance on me, saw something I didn't know was there, and changed the trajectory of my entire life. I've been looking for an opportunity to pay that forward ever since. He gestured toward the targets where she had performed so remarkably the day before. Besides, in my line of work, I've learned to trust my instincts about people. Everything about you, your attention to detail, your ability to stay calm under pressure, your natural understanding of complex systems, tells me you're meant for something more than just getting by. Sarah felt a surge of emotion at his words. For so long, she had felt like she was just surviving, doing the minimum necessary to keep herself and Emma afloat. The idea that she might be capable of excellence, of contributing something meaningful to the world, was both thrilling and intimidating. "I need time to think about this," she said finally, "and I need to talk to Emma. She deserves to understand how this might affect her life." "Of course," Jake agreed. "Take all the time you need. But Sarah, don't let fear of the unknown stop you from exploring what you're capable of. Some opportunities don't come around twice." As Sarah walked back to her truck that afternoon, she carried the folder of possibilities and a growing sense that her life was about to change in ways she had never imagined. The question was whether she had the courage to embrace that change. 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself back at the range, but this time as a trainee rather than a maintenance worker. Emma had not only supported her decision, but had been excited about the possibility of her mother pursuing something extraordinary. "You should definitely do it, Mom," she had said with typical 8-year-old confidence. "You're really good at figuring things out." The training program was more intense than Sarah had anticipated. Each day brought new challenges, different weapon systems, varying environmental conditions, complex mathematical calculations for trajectory and wind compensation. But with each passing day, Sarah felt herself growing more confident and capable. Jake had assigned her to work with Martinez, one of his most experienced marksmen, who served as both instructor and mentor. Martinez was patient but demanding, pushing Sarah to understand not just the mechanics of precision shooting, but the mental discipline required for consistency under pressure. "Shooting at paper targets is just the beginning," Martinez explained as they worked through exercises in low-light conditions. "The real test is maintaining that precision when everything around you is unpredictable." Sarah was learning that precision shooting was as much about problem-solving as it was about marksmanship. Each shot required analyzing multiple variables: wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, even the rotation of the Earth at extreme distances. It was like solving a complex puzzle with each trigger squeeze, and Sarah found herself fascinated by the intellectual challenge. Her progress was remarkable. Within 2 weeks, she was consistently outperforming soldiers with years of experience. Her natural ability, combined with her methodical approach to learning, produced results that impressed even Jake's elite team. "Ma'am, you're making the rest of us look bad," Williams joked after Sarah achieved a perfect score on a particularly challenging exercise. "Maybe we should be taking lessons from you." But success in training brought new pressures. Sarah learned that the program wasn't just about developing marksmen for competitive shooting or general military support. Jake's unit specialized in highly specialized operations that required absolute precision under extreme conditions. The civilian contractor program was designed to provide expert support for missions where failure wasn't an option. "I need to be completely honest with you about what this job entails," Jake said during a private meeting at the end of her third week. "The skills you're developing have applications beyond training exercises and competitive shooting. You would be supporting operations where lives depend on absolute precision." Sarah felt a chill of understanding. "You're talking about life and death situations." "Sometimes, yes. The scenarios vary, but the common factor is that precision matters in ways that go far beyond hitting targets on a range. Law enforcement operations, hostage situations, counterterrorism activities. These are the contexts where your skills would be applied." The weight of this responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a heavy cloak. She had been so focused on the technical aspects of training that she hadn't fully considered the human implications of the work she was preparing for. "I need to think about this," she said. "When I started this program, I thought it was about marksmanship competitions or maybe training other soldiers. I didn't realize I was preparing for situations where someone's life might depend on my accuracy." Jake nodded, understanding. "This is exactly the conversation we need to have. Because while your technical skills are exceptional, the mental and emotional demands of this work are something else entirely. Not everyone is suited for it, regardless of their shooting ability." That evening, Sarah sat in her backyard watching Emma practice soccer kicks against the fence. Her daughter's determination and focus reminded Sarah of herself at the range, completely absorbed in the challenge of improvement, finding joy in the pursuit of excellence. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma asked, noticing Sarah's distant expression. "You look worried." Sarah pulled her daughter close, breathing in the familiar comfort of her presence. "I'm trying to make an important decision about work. It's more complicated than I expected." "Is it about the shooting thing?" Emma asked with her typical directness. Sarah nodded. "Part of it. It turns out the job might involve helping people in dangerous situations. That's good because I could help protect people who need it. But it's also scary because it means I would have a lot of responsibility." Emma considered this seriously, her face showing the thoughtful expression that always reminded Sarah how mature her daughter was for her age. "Do you think you'd be good at helping people?" "I think I might be. But being good at something and being ready for the responsibility that comes with it are different things." "Mom," Emma said, settling into Sarah's lap, "you've been taking care of me and doing a good job at everything my whole life. I think you're probably ready for more responsibility than you think you are." Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah thought. Her 8-year-old daughter had just summarized something that had taken her weeks to struggle with. Sarah had been successful at everything she had attempted in this program because she approached challenges methodically, prepared thoroughly, and took responsibility seriously. The question wasn't whether she was capable of handling the responsibility. The question was whether she was willing to embrace the opportunity to use her capabilities for something meaningful, even if it meant stepping far outside her comfort zone. That night, as Sarah reviewed the training materials for the next day's exercises, she realized her decision was already made. She had discovered abilities she never knew she possessed, and now she had the chance to use those abilities to make a real difference in the world. The scared single mother who had been just trying to get by was still part of her, but she was no longer the whole story. 6 months after Jake had first handed her a rifle, Sarah stood on a rooftop overlooking the city, her rifle positioned and ready. This wasn't a training exercise. Below, a hostage situation had developed at a bank, and law enforcement had requested precision support from Jake's unit. Sarah's role was to provide overwatch, ensuring that if negotiations failed and deadly force became necessary, it would be applied with surgical precision. Through her scope, she could see the suspect pacing near the large windows, a hostage visible beside him. Sarah's earpiece crackled with updates from the tactical team leader, each transmission adding new variables to her mental calculations. Wind speed, distance, angle of engagement, backdrop considerations. Everything she had learned in training was now critically important in real time. "Sniper 1. This is command," came the voice through her earpiece. "Suspect is becoming increasingly agitated. Be prepared for green light authorization." Sarah's breathing remained steady, her heart rate controlled despite the magnitude of the situation. Months of training had prepared her for this moment, but nothing could fully prepare someone for the weight of knowing that another person's life depended on her precision. Copy command. I have a clear sight picture. Standing by. The negotiations below continued for another 20 minutes, with Sarah maintaining her position and focus throughout. She watched the suspect's patterns, noting his movements and timing, calculating the precise moment when an intervention would be both necessary and possible. Then everything changed in an instant. The suspect raised his weapon toward the hostage, and Sarah heard the authorization she had been dreading and preparing for simultaneously. Sniper 1, you are green light. Take the shot. Sarah's training took over completely. Her breathing pattern, her trigger squeeze, her follow-through. Everything happened with the mechanical precision she had developed through countless hours of practice. The rifle fired, and through her scope she watched the threat end immediately and decisively. Threat neutralized, she reported, her voice steady despite the trembling she felt throughout her body. Hostage appears unharmed. Within minutes, the tactical team had secured the scene, and Sarah began the process of documenting her actions for the inevitable review and investigation. Jake appeared on the rooftop shortly afterward, his expression mixing professional assessment with personal concern. "How are you doing?" he asked, noting the slight shake in Sarah's hands as she secured her equipment. "I'm okay," she said, though they both knew the full impact of what had just occurred wouldn't hit her until later. "The hostage is safe. That's what matters." Jake nodded, understanding the complex emotions that followed situations like this. "You performed exactly as trained. Your precision saved an innocent life today. That's not something everyone can do, and it's not something to take lightly." As they prepared to leave the scene, Sarah thought about the phone call she would need to make to Emma's school, explaining that she would be late picking her up due to work obligations. She couldn't tell her daughter the details of what had happened, but she could share the knowledge that her mother had used her abilities to help protect someone who needed it. The drive home was quiet, filled with the weight of reflection on how dramatically her life had changed. 9 months ago, she had been a struggling single mother working maintenance jobs and wondering how she would provide for her daughter's future. Now she was a precision specialist with a skill set that made her invaluable to law enforcement and military operations. When she arrived at Emma's school, her daughter bounded into the truck with her usual enthusiasm, chattering about her day and her plans for the evening. Sarah listened with new appreciation for the normalcy and innocence of her daughter's concerns. "Mom, you look tired," Emma observed as they drove home. "Was work hard today?" "Yes, sweetheart, it was. But I was able to help someone who really needed it. Sometimes the most important work is also the most difficult." That evening, as Sarah helped Emma with her homework and prepared dinner, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this point. A simple job setting up targets had revealed capabilities she never knew she possessed and led to opportunities she never could have imagined. The scared woman who had accepted Jake's rifle that first day was still part of her. But she was no longer defined by fear or limitation. She had discovered that strength and capability could emerge from the most unexpected circumstances, and that sometimes the most important thing a person could do was simply be ready when the moment called for excellence. As she tucked Emma into bed that night, her daughter looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mom, I'm proud of you for helping people with your special talent." Sarah smiled, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm proud of you too for being brave enough to support me when I needed to try something scary and new." Looking back, Sarah realized that the moment Jake had silently handed her his rifle wasn't just about discovering a hidden talent. It was about discovering the courage to become the person she was meant to be, even when she didn't know that person existed. Sometimes the most profound changes in life began with the simple willingness to accept an unexpected opportunity and see where it might lead.